their sickest patients are those under 60 who are obese. Well, one of the doctors making those warnings is Aseem Malhotra, a consultant cardiologist from London, who joins us live, as you can see. Thank you so much for being here with me. So tell me, in terms of what you've seen, how much of a difference does obese actually make it in terms of the fatality figures that we're seeing?
Well, it's a huge problem, actually. So looking and having analysed all the data, looking at data from the CDC, from Centers of Disease Control, it appears that obesity and more specifically diseases associated with a metabolic syndrome, which I'll explain in a second, are associated with a 10-fold increase in mortality. We know obesity alone in the under 60s is the single biggest risk factor. But I think what's really important to highlight here is what is the root cause of that. Now, prior to COVID-19, it is well known, it's well established in the medical literature that poor diet is responsible globally for more disease and death than physical inactivity, smoking, and alcohol combined. Specifically, 11 million deaths a year globally are attributed specifically to poor diet. Now, when one looks at what's happened with COVID-19, it's very clear that the biggest risk factor for all of these problems, obesity and these conditions such as type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure leading to heart disease, are all rooted in poor diet. Now, what I have emphasized, and I wrote about this in the Telegraph newspaper today in an article that got mentioned and featured on the front page, is that actually the time is now for government and Public Health England to be telling the public to change their diet. And the reason for that is that we know that, and this is something I see with my patients all the time, many clinicians around the country are doing this as part of a lifestyle prescription. You can reverse many of these conditions, send them into remission, certainly massively improve those risk factors within the space of just a few weeks of people cutting out the biggest sort of problem in our diet at the moment.
Well, I was going to ask you about that moving forward, and I'll come back to that in a moment or two. But, I mean, that line that you just said there of a 10-fold increase in mortality rates is a shocking figure. Is that what you're seeing globally, internationally, not just here in the UK? And do you know medically why it would be so high?
Yeah, it's very good question. So all of the data from CDC has identified this 10-fold increased risk with these conditions like type 2 diabetes and the ones we've mentioned earlier, which again are rooted in poor diet. So the reason for that, which is a very good question for you to ask, is twofold. One is excess body fat, and we know this from previous flu data. Excess body fat is thought to cause a dysregulated immune system. In other words, the immune system doesn't function optimally, and when you get infections like the flu, you're more likely to die from conditions like acute, respiratory distress syndrome, which is what kills people with COVID-19. So that's one of the mechanisms. The other mechanism is that if you eat too much ultra-processed food, even if you're normal weight, by the way, so this affects people even with normal weight, then your body is chronically getting mildly damaged, and that results in a process called chronic inflammation. Now, it appears that when you have an acute infection on top of that from COVID-19, the combination of the excess body fat and the chronic inflammation seems to be particularly detrimental.
And I take it from the tail end of your first answer that you don't think it's too late for individuals to change their behaviour and not too late for the government also to pivot in terms of advice.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right there. So I see with my own patients, and this is well established in the literature, that you can reverse these risk factors within a few weeks of just cutting out ultra-processed food, starch and sugary foods in particular. People will lose weight, but even if they don't lose weight, they're improving their health markers quite dramatically. That's the first thing. The second thing is you're absolutely right. Actually, what should be coming from the government now, they've been very effective in getting people to stay home with the message about stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives. I think actually we need to add on to that, eat real food, protect the NHS and save lives. But also, as well as individuals improving, what really needs to happen is we need to tackle the root cause of this poor diet, which is the food environment. I mean, more than 50% of the British diet now is ultra-processed foods, essentially mass-packaged foods. It's nutrient deficient, that is high in unhealthy oils, sugar and starch, and is now more than 50% of the diet. It's actually such a problem that it's even infiltrated our hospitals. So 75% of foods purchased in hospitals are unhealthy, these sorts of foods. And it's no surprise that, unfortunately, NHS workers are also afflicted with diet-related disease as well.
Aseem Malhotra, we've run out of time, but thanks so much for your time. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see my subscribe button in the middle of the screen, and go to extratimemovie.com to see our fascinating new documentary on stopping and reversing heart disease.